For my standards, this series has been honestly stellar over the past handful of months that I've been doing it, just solely because of all the comments and participation that I get from all the different conversations that build off from it, that it seems like no matter what topic or emotion I guess I bring into the subject matter here, you guys just let loose all the time, and it's great to see because I discover a crap ton of new music, and it's also a good refresher of all the stuff that I totally forgot about. So before I even get into this, just seriously, thank you all so much for your participation. I'll try my best to continue on with this series in the future. As I'm sure you guys are aware of, my previous video I talked about the angriest albums that I know. And from all the comments I've got, we continue it on now with the angriest albums that you know. In the previous video, I got a ton of comments from you guys from all different bands and artists, and as much as I would like to talk about all of them individually, I'm only going to be discussing the ones that were brought up the most. So apologies in advance if I don't talk about a particular band or album you were expecting. As for what's playing in the background, that would be Tragedy with their 2002 full-length album, Vengeance, which a handful of you guys brought up in the comments in the previous video, which I should have seen coming. As in the angriest albums that I know, I talked about His Hero Is Gone. And basically what Tragedy is when His Hero Is Gone disbanded in 1999, I believe it was either all of the members at the time or most of the members regrouped to form Tragedy. So essentially Tragedy is a continuation of His Hero Is Gone. It's a mixture of hardcore punk, crust punk, and kind of like a blend or a fusion of that neo-crust type of sound. But this is excellent hardcore punk, especially if you're looking for that that very obnoxious, very aggressive, but also at the same time very melodic fusion of hardcore punk that is just a total blast to listen to from start to finish. And again, for anyone who is interested or enjoys His Hero Is Gone, definitely check out Tragedy. Now, as for what you guys consider to be the angriest album that you know, I always like to start it off with the band and album that was brought up the most amount of times. And for me, it was quite shocking to see that so many of you guys commented Dystopia. And the reason for that is to why it's surprising to me is that I brought these guys up before in this series, but in the most depressing albums that I know, because Dystopia's approach for crust punk, in my personal view, has always been more sad and dreary and depressing, but their overall emotion that I hear is misery. And from my own personal standpoint, the emotion of misery is a mixture between sadness and anger 50-50. So I get what you guys are saying that you consider them to be the angriest sounding. It's just with their overall emotional aspect that they give off with how they play, is it always feels like it lacks any optimism, that they're kind of just like rotting away in this very deteriorated and just overall destroyed world that we've created throughout the generations and years. So again, from my personal standpoint, I think Dystopia is more depressing sounding. But from what you guys have commented, a lot of you guys consider them to be very angry and pissed off, which again is totally understandable when you look at their aesthetic and overall themes that they're presenting, both lyrically and artwork-wise. Nailbomb, Point Blank, was another album that was brought up numerous times, as this would be the one and only full-length album that both Mark Cavalier, who at the time was in Sepultura, and Alex Newport from Fudge Tunnel worked on together. And basically what it is in terms of the overall music is that, yeah, it is a thrash metal album, but in terms of the attitude and overall emotional aspect of it, it sounds more like a punk album, as lyrically this has to do more with social issues and politics, which you're noticing in the 90s, at least with Matt Cavalera's music. There was a big transition from in the 80s with Sepultura. It had more to do with evil, satanic imagery that had a lot of the cliches of extreme metal in the 80s. And in the 90s, you're noticing now, at least with Sepultura and everything Max Cavalera was doing, there's more of this political aspect being brought up and social issues that feels a lot more realistic now. And I feel like what they're trying to paint a bigger picture of, especially with all of the samples that they use, is it feels like there's a lot of war crimes they're trying to kind of like bring up in this album that just kind of like happens in this world, and so many just despicable people get away with it. And this album's just trying to portray more of the anger and angst against these just atrocities that happen all the time. So again, it's just more of this realistic type of approach lyrically. But yeah, it's just an angry, pissed off thrash metal album with elements of industrial. That's a shame that this would be the only full length they ever did. But if you just want to, like, you know, bash your head in essentially with just aggressive, angry thrash metal, Nailbomb is a must listen. Slipknot, Iowa was another album that was brought up numerous times by you guys. And let me just start off by saying, before I even get into this album, that I'm very aware that when it comes to the underground metal scene, community, whatever you want to call it, that Slipknot is often frowned upon, mainly because they are a nu metal band, they're mainstream, they're sellouts, they're not good, it's bad, it made metal safe, it appealed to a lot of the younger audience for metal, it's radio friendly, and it just made metal weak, you know, stuff like that, which is what some people think. Now, for the rest of us who don't live with their parents and or have their brains matured past the age of 15, know that the backstory and overall creation of this album is just sheer madness, because the hell that the band members and producers went through to create it is just fucking insane, as this is their sophomore full-length album, and obviously it's a follow-up to their debut, which they got a lot of recognition and success from. And because of that, there was a lot more attention and pressure for Slipknot to create something bigger and better than the previous album. With all of that, Slipknot had a lot more pressure and stress to make something bigger and better, as if now they're these kind of like heavy metal superstars, basically. And with all this attention that they really didn't want, and all that pressure that they felt as if was unjust, that's a huge reason as to why this album starts off, after the intro track anyway, with the song People Equal Shit, which is basically Slipknot giving a big giant middle finger to all the fans and critics, just giving them all that stress, telling them to basically fuck off, that we don't need any of this. And it really just sets the tone for the rest of the album, especially again when that song is titled People Equal Shit. As for the overall writing process, it's like everything I've read and heard by Slipknot fans, the ones who I used to be friends with years ago, it's just like, how could anyone go through this, essentially considering the fact that with all that stress and hostility that the band members had towards each other creating this album, it led to a lot of the members coping with it with drug addiction, alcohol addiction, and even one of the members, I think it was the guitarist, or one of the guitarists, because I know they have so many different members, essentially almost wanting to commit suicide from all of that stress and hostility that he was undergoing basically every day to create this album. I've also noticed that this is considered to be like the magnum opus for a lot of people who enjoy nu metal, to be like the best thing that came from nu metal from the, you know, the popular days of it, from like what, the late 90s to the early 2000s. And I think it's because it's often considered to be the heaviest and darkest thing Slipknot has ever done to this day, and probably ever will. And it's just solely because, again, just the hell that these band members went through, they were kind of trying to emulate that onto this album. And when you listen to the title track, Iowa, that runs for I think 15 minutes long, it's honestly really disturbing to hear just all these kind of like droney noises kind of play out after all the kind of like metal sections, to hear something just so vastly different. To basically, you're almost hearing Corey Taylor basically having like a mental breakdown of him like laughing, and essentially from what I've read, cutting himself and vomiting all over himself too in the studio when creating this album. Because as he put it, he said that in order to make something great, you have to deconstruct yourself to create something good and new from it. But man, to just basically undergo like a mental breakdown just solely for musical purposes, it shows devotion, but again, the anger and madness radiates off of this album just so aggressively and abrasive. that yeah, I can totally understand as to why so many people are saying this is an angry album overall. Anaal Nathrakh, the Codex Necro. And no, I'm not including this because this is one of my favorite bands. You guys did bring this particular album up numerous times, which is totally understandable because not only is this my personal favorite album of theirs, but I would also say it's their most primitive and savage sounding because everything is so raw, aggressive, and again, very pissed off. As even though their lyrical themes are kind of like shrouded in mystery because they've never released the lyrical contents with any lyric sheet, it gives you a good picture of what you're getting yourself into when you look at the song titles. And when you look at song titles such as Humanity is Cancer or Submission is for the Weak, it gives you a good idea of what you're getting yourself into in terms of the overall aesthetic and attitude of this particular album. One quote that perfectly summarizes the overall attitude and viewpoints of Anaal Nathrakh is a quote that they like to use by George Orwell, and I think it goes something like, "If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping over a human's face forever," is I'm pretty sure how it goes. And that sounds really pissed off and really frustrating for that to happen. So as much as I sound like a fanboy always talking about these guys, I do feel like it's justified that a lot of you guys include them as one of the angriest albums that you know. And this will always be, at least to my personal viewpoint, the most savage, pissed off, and feral Anaal Nathrakh will ever do or forever will do from there on out. Strapping Young Lad, City. I gotta be honest with you guys, I've never listened to anything by Strapping Young Lad or anything related to Devin Townsend overall before making this video until you guys were recommending this album numerous times in the comments. And it's not because I don't like Strapping Young Lad or Devin Townsend, it's more just because I've never bothered to give it a chance. I just always kind of push it off to the side, which is more of like my own fault here. But I gotta admit, this is just some really explosive, high energy death thrash with a big influence on electronic and industrial kind of like scattered throughout it, that it's just, again, as I stated, really explosive from Devin's vocal performance, the guitar riffs, how they merge together with the drums, that the pop that the snare gives off, it sounds more like a gunshot going off, that bullets ricocheting off of concrete than than any kind of percussions. It's just really explosive and extremely aggressive. And what I get from the anger of this album is maybe not the themes, but the overall energy that they're giving off with the execution musically. It's just like really aggressive anger. It's kind of like just, I want to smash my fists up against the wall until they just, like, my hands break, essentially, is kind of the energy I get from this album. So just really explosive, high energy, and really fun to listen to, just aggressive, angry death thrash with electronic elements. And definitely got to check out more by Strapping Young Lad, but overall, like I stated, a really fun listen. Admiral Angry, Buster. This was a very short-lived, kind of like down-tempo sludge-core band, as it's kind of considered as. And I noticed in the heaviest albums that I did, a handful of you guys brought this particular album up. And in the angriest albums that I know, again, it was brought, but I decided to give it a chance just solely because of the band's name. I know it kind of seems really on the nose, Admiral Angry, but figured to give it a chance. And very simplistic. Like, there's nothing about it that I would say is, you know, technical or kind of like highbrow in terms of the instrumentation or something that would require a lot of musical skill. It's just really bare bones, basic guitar riffs that are just meant to emulate anger in the most simplistic ways possible, I feel like. And I want to include this because not only did a handful of you guys bring it up, but it reminds me so much of the other album I brought up in the angriest albums that I know, Today is the Day with Sadness Will Prevail. This album reminds me of that, only now there's not any like noise samples or there's not any kind of like experimentation. It's just more on the nose of like, I'm angry and the guitar riffs are just anger. My vocal performance is just anger. I want no other emotion other than anger. So, yeah, if you want to know what down-tempo sludgecore, as they consider it to be, sounds like, definitely check this out. Even though this is the only thing they ever did, it's worth listening to. Eyehategod, Dope Sick. Now, Eyehategod is one of the most recognizable names, or one of the bigger names, in sludge metal. And prior to listening to this album, from what I knew of Eyehategod, is that they've always given off like this very like miserable, misanthropic, hateful approach to sludge metal. But with Dope Sick, there's more of this emotional aspect now because it has to deal with more of like isolation, drug addiction withdrawals, and just really putting more emphasis on that miserable type of attitude that they go with, especially with the vocal performance here. That instrumentally, I think it's supposed to be simplistic because you're just paying attention more to the vocal performance. And again, it's just misery. It's, I'm a miserable person. God, I fucking hate life, and I hate everything else that's happening in life. Again, giving off more of that misanthropic approach. That I feel like it's because of this simplicity they're giving off. It makes everything, at least emotional, become more impactful, I guess. And yeah, again, as I keep stating with all of these albums, quite a handful of you guys brought it up, and after listening to it, it makes total sense as to why you consider this to be another just really angry, pissed off sounding album. Orchid, Chaos Is Me. Now, these guys were a screamo, kind of like hardcore band that was active from the late 90s to the early 2000s, so they were very short-lived. And even though I'm not really that well-versed in screamo music, what I would always see whenever I would hear someone, online talk about screamo music is they would always talk about like a handful of bands, but every single one would always bring up Orchid. So essentially, these guys are like one of the big pioneers for screamo music anyway. And it's really apparent that when you listen to this album, even though it's like, a little over 20 minutes long, it really sticks with you. Because yeah, there is obviously anger on this album, from the vocal performance, just how vicious and frantic the individuals like screaming out everything, to the guitar riffs and drums that are just really frantically played and just all over the place with the melodies and percussions just going back and forth with each other. I feel like what the overall attitude they're trying to present here is anger, but also mixed with melancholy. So it was almost like, in a sense, you can tell that these guys are angry, but you almost feel bad for them that they're this miserable and angry. And it's an interesting combination, to say the least, that again is obviously very emotive from start to finish. That, yeah, it's another album that I would never have listened to unless you guys brought it up numerous times in the comments, which I totally thank you guys for. But yeah, Orchid, Chaos Is Me, excellent screamo that is angry but also melancholic at the same time. The Dillinger Escape Plan, Calculating Infinity. So these guys were a mathcore band that I never really had interest in listening to their music until I caught them live at their farewell tour, because I had a friend at the time that insisted I see them at least once, and I figured, might as well, I got nothing going on in the weekend, might as well see what all the hype is about. And I gotta say, even though I'm not that big of a fan of them, their live performances are stellar. Like, it's really, really well done. Their energy and their antics that they do, it's worth seeing. Sadly, now you can't do it anymore as they're still disbanded, but they put on one hell of a show, I'll give them that. But, again, I've really never had interest to listen to any of their music studio-wise, as it's always reminded me of Daughters, which, yeah, I enjoy Daughters, but think of like early era Daughters, like Canada songs, but just more emphasis on technicalities, essentially what the Dillinger Escape Plan reminds me of a lot. But with this particular album, Calculating to Infinity, I don't say this in any disrespect. I don't really consider this to be an angry album as you guys were calling it. Like, yeah, it's technical, it's aggressive, it's very harrowing and chaotic. I'll give it that. But I just don't hear anger. Like, again, the vocalist is like shouting and screaming and it's very aggressive, but I just feel like it's for the, adrenaline rush of the chaos that it gives off. I just don't feel like there's any anger in terms of the emotion from my personal standpoint. But again, very good, but nothing I would personally call angry by any stretch. Lingua Ignota, Caligula. What's interesting is just the amount of times in different videos this particular album has been brought up to me, from the most disturbing albums to even the heaviest albums. But now, for the third time, I figured I had to give it a chance and talk about it here, as Lingua Ignota, from what I remember, is not active anymore, as the mastermind behind this project, Christian Hayter, I think that's her name, disbanded this only about a year or so ago, mainly because of all the emotional turmoil she has attached with this project. She just wants to move on in life. And it's totally understandable, because the writing's written on the wall in terms of the emotional presentation you can hear off of this album. There's just so much hatred, darkness, and anger just that radiates from any song you'll listen to from the project, from any of its albums. And what it essentially is musically is it's a mixture of neoclassical, dark wave, death industrial too, which is really crazy, noise, and a lot of experimentation. And from her vocal performance and overall musical songwriting, it feels like a mixture between the darkness and eeriness of something of Chelsea Wolfe that's a bit easy to digest, but it also has all these really abrasive and unsettling moments that resembles a lot of something like Diamanda Gallus. That's what Lingua Ignota has always reminded me of, is those particular artists being just blended together. And yeah, there's just a lot of anger and darkness with this album, kind of dealing with themes to do with misogyny, relationship abuse, and just kind of portraying the anger she had from those experiences onto this particular album. And yeah, it makes it very real, dark, and unsettling, but again, there's just a lot of anger that radiates from everything you'll hear from start to finish. And that'll do it for this video, guys. Again, really curious to know what are other albums that you consider to be very angry. And like always, links provided to everything I talked about will be in the description below. And yeah, that'll do it for this video, guys. So like always, make sure you guys drink plenty of water to stay hydrated, and have a great day.